This video is going to take you through the review packet for the Geometry Midterm Review, which covers chapters 1 to chapter 5, section 4. So number 1 says to find a length of AB. So we're counting from here, from A to B. This from 4 to 3 is 1, -3, sorry. From -3 to -2 is 2, and then it's halfway between -2 and -1, which is 2.5. The other way you can find it is by taking this point, which is -1.5. and then subtracting from it the -4. That becomes -1.5 plus 4, which is 2.5. Number 2 says E is between D and F, and then DF is 8x, DE is 4x plus 8, and EF is 37. So this is already labeled for you. This is the use of your segment addition postulate, which says if I take those two segments and I add them together and set them equal to the whole segment, I've got a variable. So 4x, combine these like terms, plus 45 equals 8x. Subtract the 4x. 45 equals 4x. And then divide by 4. And x would equal 45 over 4, which is 45 over 4, which is 11 1/4, or 11.25. The question says to find DF, however. So for DF, which is 8x, I would have to do 8 times 11.25, or 8 times 11 1/4, or 8 times 45 over 4. This is probably the easiest way to do it. So 4 goes into 8 2 times, and 2 times 4 is 90, which is A. Number 3 says K is the midpoint of JL. So this one doesn't have a picture. You're going to want to draw it out. So if K is the midpoint of JL, then I've got JL, and then JK is 6x, and KL is 3x plus 6. And if that's the midpoint, these are two equal parts. So 6x would equal 3x plus 6. Subtract the 3x. 3x equals 6, and x equals 6 divided by 3, which is 2. This says find JK, KL, and JL. So I'm going to take the 2 and I'm going to plug it back in. JK would equal 6 times 2, which is 12. KL is the same, so KL would also be 12. And JL would be twice that 12, which is 24. So JK equals 12, KL equals 12, and JL equals 24, which is D. Number 4 says the measure of angle EFG, so EFG is the whole angle here, is 59. The measure of EFH is 29. Find the measure of HFG. So this is your angle addition postulate, which says that the whole, which is 59 degrees, will be made up of the sum of the two smaller parts. So if you subtract out 29, you'd get 30, which is the missing angle, HFG. And that's B. Number 5 says FH bisects EFG, and EFH is 6x minus 1, and HFG is 2x plus 3. So you can actually use the diagram that's already there, but this is new information about it, so I'm going to erase off what was there. It says that FH bisects this angle, which means it cuts it into two congruent angles. If EFH is 6x minus 1 and HFG is 2x plus 3, then I can solve for x by setting these equals to each other. So 6x minus 1 equals 2x plus 3. Subtract the 2x and add the 1, and I get x equals 1. It says find EFG, or EFH. So be careful here because notice 1 is an option. You need to make sure you read carefully to know that EFH would be here, and I would want to take that 1 and plug it back in. So 6 times 1 minus 1 is 6 minus 1, which is 5 degrees, or B. Number 6 says find the measure of the complement of angle C where angle O, where angle O is 20.6 degrees. So complements are two angles that sum to 90 degrees. If this is 20.6, then I would do 90 minus 20.6. So I'd have to borrow again. This becomes 8, and I'd get 10 minus 6, which is 4. 9 minus 0, which is 9. 8 minus 6, which is, or no, 8 minus 2, sorry, which is 6. And I get 69.4 degrees, which is D. Okay, number 7 says find the measure of the supplement to angle P, where angle P is 2y plus 10. So supplements sum to 180 degrees. So I would do 180 minus 2y plus 10, and then that minus is going to get distributed to both. So this would be 180 minus 2y minus 10, which is 170 minus 2y, which is B. Number 8 says find the perimeter and the area of the figure. So for perimeter of a triangle, I add up all the sides. So 8 plus x plus 8 plus 8x. 8 plus 8 is 16. X plus 8x is 9x. So already I can rule out B because that's not the perimeter. And then the area is 1/2 the base times the height. The base is 8x plus 8. The height is 8. So because multiplication is commutative, I can multiply this times any of the in any order I want. So I can do 1/2 times 8, which is 4, times x plus 8, and I get 4x plus 32. So A, B, and C all have the right perimeter. The only one with the correct area is C, 4x plus 32. Number 9 says find the circumference in the area of the circle and use 3.14 for pi. Round your answers to the nearest tenth. So we can start with circumference, which is 2 pi r. The r is 4.5. So this is 2 times 3.14 times 4.5. Again, you can do this in any order, so it's easier to do 1/2 times a 0.5 because I would get 9 there. And then 9 times 3.14, I would do 3.14 times 9, 36, 12, 28, and 2 digits behind the decimal place, which means 2 digits behind the decimal place in the end. So that is your circumference. And again, you can actually, from this time, rule out A, B, and C. But let's say that wasn't the case, and I wanted to find the area, which is pi r squared, pi being 3.14, r being 4.5 squared. So 4.5 times 4.5 is 20.25. And then that times 3.14. So 20.25 times 3.14. Just take it step by step and be careful. So 5 times 4 is 20. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 2 is 10. 4 times 0 is 0, plus 1. 4 times 2 is 8. 1 0 for the next column. So then the 1 gets multiplied times the 5, times the 2, times the 0, times the 2. And then the last one, 2 zeros this time. 3 times 5 is 15. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7. 3 times 0 is 0, and 3 times 2 is 6. And this time there is 1, 2, 3, 4 digits behind the decimal place. So if it starts here, 1, 2, 3, 4, I get 63.585. which here is rounded to 63.6. So D is the answer to this problem. Number 10 says the width of a rectangular mirror is 8/9 and the measure of the length of the 8/9 the measure of the length of the mirror. If the area is 72 inches, what are the length and the width of the mirror? So I've got a rectangle. The width is 8/9 the measure of the length. So if I don't know the length, then the length would be L. And the width would be 8/9 times L. And the area is 72. So L times 8/9 of L equals 72. From here, I'd get 8/9 times L squared equals 72. I can multiply by 9 on both sides to get rid of that. And then I can also divide by 8. The 8 goes into the 72 9 times, and I get L squared equals 9 times 9, which is 81. And then I would square root both sides, and L is 9. That's the length, which if I look at my choices, rules out D and B and A. And then all you have to do is 8/9 times 9. The 9's cancel, and I get 8 for my width, which confirms C as my answer. Number 11 says to find the coordinates of the midpoint of AM with endpoints A 2, -7, and M 7, 4. So hopefully you remember the midpoint would be x1 plus x2 over 2, y1 plus y2 over 2. So this is my x1, y1, x2, y2. So I get 2 plus 7 over 2 and -7 plus 4 over 2. And I get 9 over 2 and -3 over 2. Which is 4 1/2 and -1 1/2. So this is your answer for number 11, 4 1/2 and -1 1/2. If you have it mapped out like this, like hopefully you can see that this would be 4 1/2 and -1 1/2. That would make sense that that's the midpoint of that segment. Number 12 says M is the midpoint of AN. A has coordinates of -3, -7, and M has coordinates 3, 1. Find the coordinates of N. So this time you're given the one endpoint and the midpoint, and what you're missing is the other endpoint. So we're going to work on the midpoint. We're going to separate it out so that it would be x1 plus x2 over 2. That's going to equal the x of your midpoint. And then y1 plus y2 over 2 is going to equal the y of your midpoint. So the A is your x1 and your y1. So I'd get -3 plus what I don't know is x2 over 2 equals the x of my midpoint, which is 3. And then the y of my y1, which is -7, plus the y of my midpoint, which plus the y2 over 2 would equal the y of your midpoint, which is 1. So this is two separate problems that you can solve independently of each other. So I can multiply by 2 on this side. This cancels, and I get -3 plus x2 equals 6. And then add the 3, and I get x2 equals 9. Do the same thing on this side. Multiply by 2, and I get -7 plus y2 equals 2. Add the 7, and I get 9. So the coordinates of my other endpoint would be 9, 9, which is A. 13 says use the distance formula and the Pythagorean theorem to find the distance to the nearest tenth from 5, -7 to -4, 3. So distance equals the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. So the square root of your x2 is -4 minus 5 squared plus -3 minus a negative 7, which becomes plus 7 squared. And you get square root of 9, negative 9 squared plus 4 squared. 81 plus 16, which is 97. And then 97 is not a perfect square, but I know it's in between 81 and 100 perfect squares, which is 9 and 10. So in between 9 and 10 would be A, which is 9.8 units. That's one way to do it. The other is Pythagorean theorem. So if I had plotted out 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, negative 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then negative 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, negative 3. If I want to find the distance between these, then I draw a right triangle. So you can either go up and to the right and down, or you can work your way down and over. Either way, you get a vertical distance. So the difference between the y's here were negative 7 and negative 3, which means a distance of 4. And then the x's here, which you can either count or, again, get the difference between your x's, which goes from negative 4 to 5, which is 9. And then you can do your Pythagorean theorem, which is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. 16 plus 81, which is 97. And again, the square root of 97, which is in between 81 and 10, or approximately 9.8 units. Number 4 says use the slope formula to determine the slope of the line. So you can actually take these 2 points here and plug them into y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Or you can count your rise over run. This time there's no rise, which means the y, or the change in y, would be 0, over the run, which goes from negative 9 to 3, which would be 12. Either way, that would go to 0 because you have 0 in the numerator, and it's also a horizontal line, which makes your slope 0. Number 15 says write the equation of the line with slope 5 through point 68 in point slope form. Point slope is y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. So here's my x1 and my y1, and here's my m. Y minus 8 equals m, which is 5, times x minus x1, which is 6. So from these answer choices on this page, you won't see the correct answer, but on the next page, you should see y minus 8 equals 5 times x minus 6, which is in point slope form, and that's the correct answer. Number 6 says graph the line y minus 3 equals 5 times x minus 2. So from this equation, you should be able to identify your slope is 5, and the point that it passes through is 2, 3. So the opposite of what follows the x, the opposite of what follows the y. So if you look at your 3 graphs here, 2, 3 is here, which is the only one that actually passes through that point. So right there, process of elimination, you can use to determine that 16 will be B. But also the slope from there is 5. So I want to make sure I can count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and over 1. And that line continues through those 2 points. So you want to start with your point and then use your slope. Number 17 says determine whether the lines are parallel, intersect, or coincide. So the first thing I want to do is get each of these into slope-intercept format. The second one's already there, but the first one I've got to get into that format. So I'm going to add the 16x. So I get 4y equals 16x plus 4, and then divide by 4. And I get y equals 4x plus 1. And then I want to compare the slopes of these lines, which are different. If they were the same and the point was the same, then they would coincide. If they were the same and the point was different, they'd be parallel. If they are different, like they are in this case, then these points intersect, which means 17 would be B. Number 18 says ABC is an isosceles triangle. AB is the longest side with a length of 11x plus 3. BC is 5x plus 6. And CA is 4x plus 9. Find AB. So it's isosceles. These two are marked as congruent, which means 4x plus 9 would equal 5x plus 6. And I'd get x equals 3. And it wants AB. So I have to take that 3 and plug it back in. 3 times 11 is 33, plus 3 is 36, which is A. Number 19 says one of the acute angles in a right triangle has a measure of 51.5. What's the measure of the other acute angle? So the acute angles of a right triangle sum to 90 degrees. They're complementary. So 90 minus 51.5. This becomes 9. This becomes 8 is 0.58. 38.5 degrees, which is C. Number 20 says, find the measure of angle DCB, which is this angle here, DCB, given A is congruent to E. Nope, A is congruent to F, and B is congruent to E. This is your third angles theorem that says that if you have two pairs of angles that are already congruent, then the third must also be congruent. So if CDE, which is here, is 54 degrees, then so is BCD, 54 degrees, which is C. 21 says write an equation for the line parallel to the line shown that passes through -2, -2. So what we need to get from this diagram is what's the slope of this line. So pick 2 points that are obvious, like this point here and this point here. Go through the nice round numbers and then get your slope. So rise would be 1, 2, 3. Over run would be 1. That's your M. And then here's my point. This is my X1. This is my Y1. These are all in slope-intercept format. So Y equals MX plus B is my goal. But I can use point slope to get there. So I would do Y minus Y1 equals M times X minus X1. Y minus a -2 becomes +2 equals the slope, which is 3. X minus a -2 becomes +2. Y plus 2 equals 3x plus 6. And then subtract the 2. Y equals 3x plus 4, which is D. Number 22 says, which is not a positioning of a right triangle with leg lengths of 3 units and 2 units. So if you look at this, and hopefully this is a little obvious, if you look at A, this is the only one that doesn't obviously appear to be a right triangle. This looks like it probably would be isosceles. All of B, C, and D are definitely right triangles, and this is 2 units, this is 3, 2 units and 3, and this is 2 units. A little bit harder to read that's probably 3. Which means of all the ones that can't be a right triangle, A would be your answer. 23 says, which conjecture is true? So you're looking for which of these statements is true. A, an even number plus 3 is always even, so test it out. Even number like 2 plus 3, is that even? Right away I can tell that that's not correct. B, an even number plus 3 is always prime. So even plus 3 is 5. That one's prime. 4 plus 3, that one's prime. Even 6 plus 3, that's 9. That's no longer prime. So I can rule out B. C says an even number plus 3 is always odd. So I already checked 5, 7, 9. So far these are all odd. D says a prime number plus 3 is always even. So prime would be 2. Would be 3, would be 5, would be 7. Are these always even? The very first one means that's wrong, which means that D is also not true, leaving C as the only option for which one was true for all of our guesses. 24 says which conditional statement is true. So conditional statement now, if then format. A says if two angles are acute, then they are complementary. So if they're acute, they could be 20 and 20. Doesn't add up to 90 degrees, which means that this one is not true. If an angle is acute, then its measure is less than 90 degrees. B is true. 25, what's the converse of if there are clouds in the sky, then it's raining? So remember, converse, we switch the order, which would say if it's raining, then there are clouds in the sky. That rules out B. That rules out D and C. If it's raining, then there are clouds in the sky would be A, which is your converse. 26, which property is used in solving y plus 3 equals 11? To solve this, I would subtract 3 from both sides of the equation, which is the subtraction property of equality, or D. 27 says, which is an example of the reflexive property? So when you look at your choices, remember reflexive property is anything that equals itself, which is B. 28, identify a pair of parallel segments. So I need two segments that are on the same side or can be formed on the same side and also don't intersect. A, B, and E, H are actually skew, so I rule out those. If I go to B, F, B, which is here, and A, B is here, those are perpendicular, so I rule out those. A, B, and H, G, which are parallel segments. They don't already form a plane, but you can connect these sides together to make them into a plane. And then just to check for sure, the last one, which is DH, which is here, and FG, which is here, those would also be skew. They're not intersecting, but they do not form, or they're not on the same plane. 29 says, give an example of corresponding angles. So 8 and 4, which are here and here, are actually the corresponding angles. If I were to look at 4 and 1 are a linear pair. 3 and 6 are, there's actually no direct relationship there. They're external, but they're not on alternate sides, so it's not alternate external. And then 6 and 1, again, no direct relationship there. They are alternate, but they are not both interior. A is the only one that are corresponding. Actually, D says 5 and 7. Totally read that wrong. 5 and 7 are here and here. Those are vertical angles. Still not corresponding, though. 30 says, find the measure of angle ABC. So these angles here are corresponding, and the lines are parallel with those two. That means that they are equal to each other. So x would equal 3x minus 70. Subtract the 3x. Divide by -2. And x is 35. Because this angle is 35, this one is also 35, which means 30 would be C. 30 says, apply the transformation M to the triangle with the given vertices and identify and describe the transformation. So if I start as xy and I shift x left 6 and add 2 to y, this is a translation, and it would be 6 units left and 2 units up. So 6 units left and 2 units up is A. My points literally went from E, which was here, here, and they went 6 units left, so each of them went 6 units left and 2 units up. 6 units left, 2 units up, 6 units left, 2 units up. That is a translation. 32 says, classify which is here. So they give you DAB is 60 degrees, ABD is 75 degrees, and CDB is 25 degrees. And it wants you to classify DBC. So you're classifying this triangle here on the right-hand side. So you can look at this a couple of different ways. One is use your linear pair, which would be here. Those two add up to 180, which means that this would be 105, which makes that triangle on the right obtuse. The other way you can look at it is This angle here, 75, is the sum of these two angles, the remote interior, which would make this 50. And then I would do 25 plus 50, which is 75. Subtract that from 180. And I get 105. Either way, that triangle on the right there is obtuse. Number 33, classify triangle ABC by its side lengths. So I've got these two which are marked as congruent. That makes it isosceles. But BC is also marked as the same measure as AC, which means all three of these side lengths are the same. And this is an equilateral triangle. Then you get to the numeric response, so no more multiple choice. Number 1 says the supplement of an angle is 24 more times than its complement. Find the measure of the angle. So that when we talk about the supplement of an angle, these are two angles that add up to 180 degrees. So if I don't know the angle itself, then its supplement is 180 minus x. And this is saying that that is 24 more than 4 times its complement. So this would equal 4 times the complement, and the complement would be 90 minus x, so complement. And again, what it's saying is that the supplement, or the 180 minus x, is equal to 24 more than 4 times its complement. So 4 times its complement would be 4 times 90 minus x, and that plus 24. So you get 180 minus x equals 360 minus 4x plus 24. 180 minus x equals 360 plus 24, which is 384, minus 4x. Add the x here. Actually, I'll do it the other way around. Add the 4x. So 3x. Subtract the 180. Equals 204, and x would equal 68 degrees. So this is the original angle, and then its supplement, just to check, would be 112, which is, so if I did the supplement, would equal 4 times the complement. Complement of this would be 22 plus 24, or 88 plus 24, which is 112. So the original angle itself is the 68 degrees. Number 2 from the numeric response says a right triangle is formed by the x-axis and the y-axis and the line of negative 3x plus 5. Find the hypotenuse. So if it's formed by the x-axis and the y-axis, then I know it goes like this. And then the line of negative 3x plus 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's my y-intercept. 1, 2, 3 to the right 1. 1, 2, 3 to the right 1. This is your hypotenuse. So what you want to do is find the point here, which I know would be 0, 5, but also the point here, which is my x-intercept. And we can find the x-intercept by making y 0. So if 0 equals negative 3x plus 5, subtract the 5, divide by 3, and x is 5/3. So this would be 5/3 and 0. So the length of the hypotenuse can be used by doing a squared plus b squared equals c squared, or doing x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. So if I use these 2 points, I'd get 5/3 minus 0 squared plus 0 minus 5 squared. 5/3 squared plus negative 5 squared. That's 25 over 9 plus 25. This has to have the same denominator. So I would say that 25 over 1 becomes what? Over 9. Have to multiply by 9. To 25 over 9, add those, I get 250 over 9, all underneath the square root. which is the square root of 250, over 3, square root of 250. So this is 2 and 125, which is 5 and 25 and 5 and 5. Remember, square roots, you can take 2 out at a time. So 2 5s go to the outside as 5, and then this would be square root 10. And that would be, this says round your answer to the nearest hundredth. So if it said leave it in terms of your square root simplified, this is what it would be. Or we approximate. So the square root of 10 is really close to root 9, a little bit bigger. So we're going to say that this is 5 times 3.1 over 3. So 5 times 3.1 is 15.5 over 3. And then 15.5 over 3, so 15.5 divided by 3, this is 5. There's a decimal there, that's once. That's 6 times. And that's going to get repeated. So if we went around that to the nearest hundredth, it would be 5.17. Number 3 says find the value of x so that m is parallel to m. So if those two lines were parallel, these angles would be same side interior, which would mean they're supplementary. So in order for these to be parallel, 6x plus 5 plus 5x minus 12, 11x would have to equal 180, minus 7, 11x would equal 187, and then divide by 11, that's once. So 187 divided by 11 and 7. So x would have to be 17. Number 4 says, in an isosceles triangle that has a perimeter of 50 inches, the congruent sides measure 2x plus 3. So that would be 2x plus 3 and 2x plus 3 on the other side. The third side is 4x. If the perimeter is 50, then I would do 2x plus 3 plus 2x plus 3 plus 4x equals 50. So 2 plus 2 plus 4 is 8x plus 3 plus 3 is 6. 8x would equal 44, and x would equal 44 over 8. Or 11 over 2, which is 5.5 or 5.5. And at this time it's asking for the length of the x, so that's your answer. You don't have to plug it back in. Either one of those, 5.5, or sorry, yeah, 5.5 or 5.5. Either one of those would work. Number 5 says find the value of x. So this triangle is equilateral, and if it's equilateral, it means it's equiangular. Each of these angles would be 60 degrees, which means 2.5x plus 6 would equal 60 degrees. Subtract the 6, 54. X would equal 54 divided by 2.5, so 54 divided by 2.5. Move this decimal once, which means I add on a 0 here. 25 goes into 54 twice. Goes into 40 once. Have to add a 0, so your decimal comes right down. And 6 times. So 21.6 is your value for x. Okay, short answer, so just the directions change. But number 1 says find the value of, or find AB. If you look at this diagram, that BX is a perpendicular bisector. It hits this side at its midpoint and it's perpendicular, which means that any point that lies on that perpendicular bisector, like B, would be equidistant from the endpoints here. So AB itself is going to be 12.5. Number 2 says identify the point of intersection of the points of the with endpoints 2, 4, and 2, 8, and its perpendicular bisector. So if I've got 2, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, there's a point. 2, 8 would be 5, 6, 7, 8 here. So this is 2, 4, and this is 2, 8. And it says it's perpendicular bisector. So perpendicular means that it's going to be horizontal now and hit this at its midpoint. So halfway between 4 and 8 is 6. This would be 2, 6. Number 3 says to find the length of FY. This time I've got an angle bisector. I know that because it's marked here, which tells me that it's equidistant from the sides of this angle. So if DY is 17.25, FY is also 17.25. Number 4 says GX, H, and HX are angle bisectors. So these two are cut into two congruent parts. And then it says find the measure of XHG. So XHG is this little angle here, and the distance from X to GH. Well, we just said that these two are congruent, so XHG is 39 degrees. And the distance from X to GH would be the perpendicular segment that goes to the side, which means from where all the perpendicular angle bisectors meet, to the sides are congruent. So if this and this and this are congruent, then the distance here would be 14.2. So that's from the in-center to the sides, which are congruent. Number 5, now if you look at this diagram, hopefully you recognize that you're looking at medians. The medians is the 2/3 rule. So if MX is the length of the whole segment here, MW would be the 2/3 part. So 15 times 2/3, I can first divide by 3, which is 5, and then multiply by 2, and I get 10. Number 6 says find the next item in the pattern. So I go 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 8, and 8 to 13. So the difference here is 1, and then again 1, and then it jumps to 2, and then it goes to 3, and then it goes to 5. So my pattern here is jumping from 1 to 2 to 3 to 5. So there's no consistent jump there. You're not adding odds. You're not adding anything like that. So then you have to think of another way to get it. If I look at 2 is the sum of the two numbers that come before it, which technically would be 0 and then 1. 3 is the sum of the two numbers that come before it, which are 2 and 1. 5, sum of the two numbers that come before it, which are 3 and 2. 8, sum of the two numbers that come before it, which are 5 and 3. 13, sum of the two numbers that come before it, which means the next part would be the sum of the two numbers that come before it. And if I add 8 and 13, I get 21, which is the next number in the pattern. Number 7 says show the conjecture is false by finding a counterexample. So counterexample is something that makes the first part true but the second part false. The difference of two odd numbers is a prime number. So I want to find two odd numbers whose difference is not a prime number. So I could say that two odd numbers, which would be like 5 and 3, that is a prime number. So that's not a counterexample. If I go to the next one, if I say 7 minus 5, that's again 2. So it doesn't say they have to be consecutive odd numbers. So I can say that 13 minus 3, because those are both odd numbers, is 10. That's not a difference of which would be a prime number. So these two, 13 minus 3, would be the difference of two odd numbers that their result is not a prime number. That would be a counterexample, but obviously there's lots more of those. There's more than that. Number 8 says write true or false. If a number is a prime number, then the number is odd. So I know the first prime numbers are 2. That itself is not odd, which makes that false. Number 9 says to classify the angle by, this triangle by its angle measures. 50, 80, and 50 angle measures are all less than 90 degrees, which makes this acute. 10 says classify it by its side lengths. This time you've got 2 congruent sides, which makes this isosceles. 11 says given your individual triangles, what's the value of x? So this is one of those where you've got, again, third angles theorem. J matches P, G matches N, which means this last remaining angle pair must be congruent. So x would equal 35. And 12 says, true or false, given triangle ABC is congruent, and DEF, to use CPCTC to prove that A is congruent to D, you must prove the triangles are first congruent. This is true. So before I can get to CPCTC, I have to prove the triangles are congruent using one of my 5 acronyms. All right, that's it. Those are all the answers to your packet. Hopefully this helps you prepare for your exam. Good luck.